Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today we are going to talk more about the factors and everything leading up to the Revolutionary War and the Declaration of Independence. The first shots are fired. In 1776, the colonists of British America made three important decisions. First, they declared independence from Britain. Second, they chose a Republican model for their new government. And third, they confederated the 13 states as the United States of America. These decisions were unprecedented and risky. The colonists gambled their lives and property, but found a strength that surprised and changed the world. This engraving shows the battle on Lexington Green with the colonial militia fleeing after being fired on by British troops. This is a battle that we are going to talk about later in this video. Based on this engraving, does it seem likely that the Patriots would defeat the British? Look at all of the British soldiers in the center of this picture, and then look at all of the colonists scattered around the outer edge. You know, if you were looking at this picture and you were going to take a bet who's going to win this fight, it would not be on the people who are running away. The dispute between the British government and the colonists had taken a drastic turn. Following the passage of the Coercive Acts, military commander General Thomas Gage had been named governor of Massachusetts. John Hancock, Samuel Adams, and other colonial leaders then convened a provincial congress to govern Massachusetts without Gage. They also began to stockpile arms and ammunition. So this man, Thomas Gage, had been named governor of Massachusetts. Now this was chosen by the British, so the colonists are going to band together to resist this guy. This is going to lead to the battles of Lexington and Concord. On April 19, 1775, war erupted at Lexington and Concord, two country towns west of Boston. Gage provoked the battles by sending troops to arrest Hancock and Adams in Lexington and to seize Patriot weapons stockpiled in Concord. Makes sense? These guys have been organizing a government to resist his rule, and he knows that they're stockpiling weapons in Concord. Tipped off by men including Paul Revere, who had ridden into the countryside to warn of the approaching British troops, the local patriots rallied to drive the troops back to Boston. The patriot fighters were militia, full-time farmers, and part-time soldiers. So the patriot fighters were not full-time soldiers. They were mostly farmers or blacksmiths or just normal everyday people. They weren't these professional soldiers like the British had. So it just goes to show just how little training that they had, and they're going up against the top military in the world. By morning, about 70 patriots had gathered on Lexington Green. The British soldiers, called Redcoats, marched into town at dawn, and the British commander ordered the colonial militia to disperse. As they did, someone fired a shot. When the shooting stopped, 8 patriots were dead. The Redcoats marched on to Concord. What happened next stunned the British. Following a skirmish with patriots in Concord, the British troops began their march back to Boston. However, hundreds of Minutemen, or Patriot militia, who responded quickly to calls for soldiers, lined the roads, firing at the British from behind trees and stone walls. Stunned and exhausted, the British reached the safety of Boston in the late afternoon. The Patriots had killed or wounded more than 200 British soldiers, and the Patriots raced to take further action against the British. From throughout New England, thousands of Patriot militiamen rushed to confine the British troops in the city. Provincial assemblies of Patriots seized control of the New England colonies. Loyalists, or colonists who remained loyal to Britain, fled to take refuge in Boston. But would the rest of the colonies help New England fight the British? So, the British soldiers go to attack this militia, and they're ordered to disperse, and they do. Someone, and historians aren't sure who, fires the first shot at this battle, and eight colonists are dead at the end of it. The British march on to Concord, where they knew that they were stockpiling all these weapons. They get there, it's completely emptied out. The Minutemen had stalled them long enough in Lexington that they were able to disperse the weapons that they had began stockpiling. So their whole goal was to go there and to get that stockpile of guns and ammunition that the colonists had been saving, and by the time they got there, they had already emptied it out. So it was all for nothing, really. So they turn around and they're marching back, and this is all in one day, mind you. So they're starting to get tired, and that's whenever they're ambushed by all of these Minutemen. They're shooting from bushes, they're shooting from behind trees, out of the tops of barns, behind stone walls. Now, the British military is used to fighting in a very specific way. They are used to following the rules of war that other European armies follow, where everybody stands in line. It's very organized, very methodical, and but they're not used to fighting against people who are, shooting and running or hiding behind trees, or, they're fighting in a completely different way, and it completely throws the British off. So that's why this ambush was so effective. So they retreat into Boston, that the British have firm control over, and now all of the militia are forming this barrier around Boston and keeping them in Boston. While this is working for now, they know that it's not going to hold forever. Are the rest of the colonies going to help them? This map here kind of shows the path that was taken that day. The green arrow is Paul Revere. He's the one who is able to warn, I'm sure you've heard the story, the British are coming, the British are coming. That was Paul Revere. He rides ahead to warn the other Americans, the soldiers are coming, they're coming for the stockpile. So he passes along that information, and all of the little white explosion markers are places where they fought with the American militia. So it just goes to show how many of these ambushes they had set up all the way back to Boston. These battles don't really start until the British troops have already marched all the way from Boston to Concord, and then they're on their way back. So that's whenever all these little ambushes are set up. So they're already exhausted by the time they're on their way back, and the British are just taken completely by surprise. The Second Continental Congress. The answer came in May 1775 when delegates from all the colonies assembled in Philadelphia for the Second Continental Congress. To the relief of New Englanders, Congress assumed responsibility for the war. Armed volunteers from the middle and southern colonies marched north to join the Patriots' siege of Boston. Congress gave the command of the new Continental Army to George Washington. Washington had served as a colonial officer in the French and Indian War, and he came from Virginia, the largest and most powerful colony. New England needed Virginia's help to win the war. Some radical members of the Continental Congress wanted to declare American independence from Britain, but they recognized that most of their constituents were not yet ready to do so. Most colonists still hoped to remain within the British Empire, but without paying taxes to Parliament. In July 1775, after 3 months of bloodshed, Congress sent an olive branch petition to King George III. The petition reaffirmed the colonists' allegiance to the king, but not to Parliament. The king rejected the petition and sent more troops to Boston. So this olive branch petition that was sent to King George III, it was an attempt at a peaceful resolution. If you've ever heard the expression extending an olive branch, that means that you're trying to have a peaceful resolution to a conflict, and that is what the colonists were trying to do here. They wanted to say to the king, hey, we still want to be part of Britain. We still serve you, the king. We recognize the king's authority, but we are not going to submit ourselves to the authority of the Parliament. And the king absolutely refuses this proposal and sends more troops to Boston. So the colonists did try a peaceful resolution, and the king is going to fully reject it. Colonists disagree over British rule. Most colonists supported the Continental Congress and the boycott of British imports, but as a large minority preferred British rule, these colonists became known as Loyalists. Champions of law and order, many Loyalists dreaded Patriot crowds and committees, viewing them as illegal and brutal. One Loyalist declared, "If I must be enslaved, let it be by a king at least, and not by a parcel of upstart lawless committeemen. If I must be devoured, let me be devoured by the jaws of a lion, and not gnawed to death by rats and vermin." So these Loyalists who wanted to stay with the British, they completely rejected this Continental Congress. They did not look at people like Paul Revere and George Washington. They didn't look at them as heroes. They looked at them as criminals, as traitors, as rebels, as trash, as rats and vermin, as the quote goes. So it just goes to show that even in the colonies, they were not of one mind. Alright, we're going to end this video by looking at this chart here. It says, who were the Loyalists? The Loyalists were a diverse group. There were government officials, Anglicans, religious pacifists, large landholders, and merchants and wealthy businessmen. And they all had their own reasoning for supporting the British Crown here. Government officials were supported by their authority. The Anglicans, which were the religious people, taken vows of allegiance and obedience to the king. Religious pacifists. Pacifist is a person that is opposed to any sort of fighting. Were intolerant of violence as means to solve disputes. Large landholders feared that they would lose their property. If there was a new government, would they still be able to keep all of their land? They didn't know. So they wanted to stay with the British, because they knew under British rule they were going to get to keep their land. And the merchants and the wealthy businessmen were mostly located in coastal cities, and like the landholders, they feared loss of property. You know, business is good as it is. They have a good thing going, and they don't want it to end. So that just kind of gives a brief little description of who the Loyalists were. Once again, the Loyalists were colonists that were not in favor of independence. Okay guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you have any questions, you know how to get a hold of me. I hope everybody's having a great day, and I will see you again next time.